So the goals for this session, and it looks like we may have a few other people still drifting in, maybe not. We're considering you all the diehards. We really want to build on the panels throughout the conference, and in particular, the lightning round. So really, this is about what do we need to do to be successful moving forward, and we're looking for specific action steps and strategies to do so. And I just want to emphasize that you've really been preparing for this session throughout the entire time. You've listened to a lot, you have a lot of expertise, just from your day-to-day work, as well as we asked you to use those charts to identify some key policy, practice, and research opportunities. So that was really designed to help you focus on what we would do during the time. The other thing that has always been a CARDI goal, as I mentioned this morning, is that, and the goals of the other organizers with this conference, is really to help you make the most of your time here. You have this opportunity to chat and be a part of a larger group that you're not typically with, and so we really want to help you make the most of that. We also have what I would think of as some resource cheerleaders, some members of the planning team that are in the audience, and one of the things that we have emphasized is wanting to help you move forward. Exactly what that looks like moving forward, we're not sure. Helene, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know that LISC has said that they would be happy to facilitate ongoing conversations of what might come out of this. Anything you want to add to that, Helene?
Well, as part of the zombie work, we've been having monthly group calls, and we can add anyone to the list of people being notified. Land banks participate, the zombie grantees, but we also have others who are interested in these issues. Just putting that as a resource if there are issues we'd want to, debate or use that forum to come up with some action plans. Plus, coming out of these groups, if you're interested in continuing to talk amongst yourselves and come up with particular action plans, whether practitioner, policy, or research topics, I'm happy to work with you and David also to keep those conversations going. We can have smaller, email chats or phone calls or whatever to keep the work going. So.
Okay, so Deanna, do you want to add to that with OEI?
Sure. So many of you were introduced to the Office of Engagement Initiatives last night at the dinner. Our director, Basil Safi, was there, and we steward the Engage Cornell mission. We were delighted to see how many people in the room had already worked with students and had student learning and faculty participation as elements of the work that you're doing. If people have more ideas or just expanding on what's already happening, we do have some funding to support that student learning and faculty involvement.
So the way that we had organized this session, we'd gone back and forth in terms of setting up specific topics and maybe following along the same lines as the sessions that we've had. So, a session that a group could talk about climate change, or a group could talk about health impacts or other things. But what we thought was that we really want to take this as an opportunity to have people think across all of those different topic areas. And in terms of really identifying specific types of strategies, we thought we would break it into these 4 groups with the option of doing something else if you had an idea that you really wanted to focus on. So we want a group on policy changes, and we were going to put that towards the back room. Innovative programming and community engagement, Diane, we were going to have focus on that, and we were going to do that over here. Education, training, and leadership, we were going to have Caroline focus on, and that was over here. And then resources, I was going to guide, and David would take the other group. And the role of the facilitators is really to help us address these questions. So really to name the action step, what is it? We want to have you clarify the issue. So what's the action step designed to address? And then also think about key partners. Who are people that are already working on these topics, or other ones that definitely need to be at the table? We'd like you to consider the geographic scope. Is this something that's a local initiative? Is it regional? So we were talking about multi-county, or is it statewide, or perhaps even broader? And then to get back to Deanna's point, how might university faculty students contribute to this action step. And then this is the key part in terms of thinking about going forward. Who in your group is willing to work on this to help move it forward? Now, because I think about, in my role as a facilitator and in community development, my goal is also to really meet your needs. So on one hand, we can do this. It's a little bit of a smaller group than we originally anticipated, but we could also take a minute, and if there's something that folks really wanted to hone in on across a couple different groups, which is really the other, I'm totally fine with going with that. And in part, I'm thinking about the conversation that came up, and I think the gentleman who raised it has left, but you talked about really wanting to work together to identify ways to address this issue of the costs of demolition and then also development. So I just do want to raise the opportunity before so these are possibilities. You can break into these groups if we want to, and we can do that. But is there anybody who wants to say, hey, I have something that I've really been working on and it's in the back of my mind. I've thought about it over the course of the conference and I'd like to drill down and ask if anybody else would be interested. So I'm going to open the floor for that for just a minute.
I've been thinking a lot about outcomes, especially with tax foreclosure auctions. And one of the things that happens a lot is I feel a lot of the counties hide behind the tax auction process. And I'm really interested in maybe working with somebody to research recidivism of how many of these properties are coming back time and time and time again. Because what happens is the treasurers often focus on, we sold the property, we got it out the door. But they don't talk about, okay, the property sold for $50, the person never showed up, they never got the insurance, there was a fire, whatever. So I think if we even took one county or a group of counties and just looked at, okay, over the last 20 years, here's the addresses, put them in a spreadsheet, how many of these came back, multiple times, something like that.
I've actually doing something similar for the land bank in Erie County right now. With that same data set. So looking at the impacts of long-term tax delinquency and the sort of make whole provision. I don't know how everybody else's county works, but essentially in Erie County Real Property Tax Services pays unpaid taxes to every municipality when they don't have pay taxes. So it's a really sort of perverse tax policy. So local governments outside the city, the towns and villages get repaid. So they don't really have a stake in the game. They get their check all the time.
It incentivizes them to just
Yes. Yeah. And then within that, there's this buried loophole where when the demolition happens, that gets added to the tax bill. The county pays that as well. So the county is a receiver of both bad properties and unpaid tax liens. So yeah, there's a lot of research already sort of going on in that arena right now in Buffalo.
So we have one possibility of digging into this conversation a little bit deeper. Is there anybody else that has a particular issue that they're chewing on and wants some assistance? Go ahead, Gina.
So we talk about the problems with code enforcement and the challenges that a lot of the local municipalities have with implementing and enforcing code compliance. One of the things that we hear a lot, because there's so many part-time code officers that are covering multiple jurisdictions, there's never enough time to do what they need to do. There's a lot of requests for countywide code enforcement or statewide code enforcement. But of course, the challenges with home rule is how could you possibly put those resources together on a regional basis when there's so many local ordinances and things to track down. One option, I think, might be something that we could start with is countywide housing court, because that would provide more of the teeth that the code officers wish that they had locally and don't always have. But I'm wondering if, in that two-step approach between housing court, some kind of a legal remediation and the code enforcement, what can we do more regionally to take the burden off the small local municipalities to make it more effective to have safe and healthy housing?
Okay.
If I could speak to that, One of the things would also be worthwhile to deal with, I'm Charlie Straney, mayor of St. Johnsville, is figure out a way to bring codes and local police departments together so that they're both on the same sheet of music. We have these police departments that are doing the speeding tickets or, but they really don't see that function as important or under their responsibilities. And it is. Because when you look at what's happening in these little villages, that's where your drugs are. That's where all your problems are. If we work more closely with codes, and if something could be done to put that model together, because I'm just forced to try to sell it to the police department and sell it to the codes guy. And if you said, here's a workable model, here's how it works, that would be great.
To Gina's question, I'm Joe from Seneca County. Seneca County and I believe Wyoming County have been doing code enforcement at the county level for the entire jurisdiction since the 70s. I believe each town had to pass a resolution giving up that home rule authority to the county, and then the county had to form the department and staff it, and has continued to do so. And I think for a small rural county like we are, it's been useful, especially for housing issues, but for larger development, it's gotten very political in many ways. So there's negatives and positives.
Caroline?
I think to your point about the process, and I think in the last panel they talked about it, is the ticketing approach to codes versus having to go to court would be something that would be worth discussing, because I think there are a lot of communities that would like to go to it's like a parking ticket. You just pay it and you fix it. You don't have to go to court and argue it, and I think that might be helpful to have a discussion about.
Okay, so I think what I heard there were a possibility of 4 conversations. Maybe that was lumped in. So what? That was lumped in? Okay, so I'm hearing, Tolga, if I'm speaking to it the way you were, research on the outcomes of tax foreclosures. The second one was how to think about code enforcement rules collaboratively across counties and having the same types of rules in the context of home rules. Did I do that justice, Gina? You might want to fix it a little bit. Is that okay? Okay. And then the third thing was codes and police departments working more closely together. So we have 3 options. I guess the question is, are people interested in breaking into those groups? Gina, I'll send you to the back. And we'll have a facilitator. You have another one, Diane? You want to dig into it deeper? Okay. Okay.
For instance, the ticketing program or the ticketing idea would be a program that you could develop. The court system might be a policy that you develop to have a multiple court system or whatever. So I think if you take the ideas they mentioned and put them in the categories, they're one project that fits in one of those categories. The educating the police and code enforcement to work together. It's kind of like an education program that you could develop, or a module, whatever. So I'm thinking those ideas all fit under those broad categories, if that makes sense. And then there may be others that you can bring up under those categories as well.
And one is to continue brainstorming about possibilities, and we can put them into the categories we've been talking about and stay together as a big group to think these through. Or we can break into smaller groups and delve into each of those issues a little bit more deeply. Again, I want to have you make the most of this opportunity. So what do you all think? I can direct you and say, let's start with those groups, or we can stay together. I'm putting you on the spot. I told you I'd do that. Were you saying? So this group wants to stay talking about the tax issue? Okay, is there anybody else that wants to join the group talking about tax foreclosures? Okay, Gina, you want to stay at this table for your conversation? Okay, so is there interest in talking about the code enforcement issue with Gina? Anybody want to move to this table? Juliet, were you raising your hand? So, okay, folks can move over with Gina. And how about code enforcement and police departments? That's you. You want to go back? You can combine it? Okay, that's fine. So, who do we have left given that? Anybody that is not interested in thinking about those specific topics but wants to address issues more generally? If that's the case, we'll move over to this table in this corner.
There's a potential that we could. Right now, we don't know.
So what we would like to have each group do is report out on the strategies that they came up with. And just again, because we did take a little bit of a different focus with the groups than we initially started off with, if when you start, you could just remind us of what you kind of focused on within your group. And I know you guys took a broad approach, and that's fine to just make that clear. Okay? How about we start with you, Diane?
Sure.
Okay.
So I'm going
Speak.
to just give a very brief, if you want to add something to what I say, feel free to do that. So, yeah. So what we did is we went around the table, introduced ourselves to each other, gave a background of what we're working on. And then we posed the question that if money was no object, what would you do? What would be the next step? What would be important to what you do right now? So the first, Garrett suggested that, especially based on what we've been doing here, it would be really important to establish a housing network. And so Helene brought up the fact that right now they're doing monthly calls. We talked about doing something like that, that all of the people that are in the room here join a housing network and there's consistent communications. Did you want to add anything? Okay. All right, the next one is, how do you pronounce it? Avi. Avi works in Schenectady, and he said the biggest need that he sees in the area is planning. In order to be successful, they really need better planning. Planning updates, the comprehensive plan needs to be updated, so funding for planning is really important. The next person, Denise, she works for Cornell. She felt that the most important thing that she got out of this and that she sees in her neighborhood is to have consistent code enforcement. And she said she doesn't see that in her community. She felt it was very important to educate code enforcement officers and to increase the capacity in the city to be more consistent. She felt that there weren't solid policies and procedures for code enforcement, and that really had to be done. Did you want to add anything to? Okay, the next one, Margot. She felt that there should be a community leadership program, that it's really important to reach out to those leaders in the community and take advantage of what they can provide. Community engagement, helping to move projects forward. Did you want to add more, Margot?
I was specifically talking about both the idea of engaging folks who are often not at the table by building capacity and not just hoping or looking for that capacity, and then working with professionals and folks who are often at the table about behaviors for inclusive leadership.
The leaders are an untapped resource in the community. Next, Michael. He suggested that we really work at removing technology barriers. We need to use existing infrastructure to expand our technology. We need to make sure the communities have the proper tools to use the technology, to use the data that they have, and it would really help with civic engagement, particularly in rural communities. Did you want to add more? Okay. I'm going to speak for Helene now. Helene felt that it was really important that we look into the Cornell Land Grant College opportunities and how we can really use the network of CCE offices around the state to bring resources to all of our programs, to connect the university to our communities.
Well, a big piece of it is tapping into, the LISC resources also on the LISC network to sort of join the networks together so that we can really bring resources to the community. Because you have this incredible existing network, offices in just about every county, and we're trying to work across the state, but there's some places that are hard to reach. So I think the idea is really, let's think about the collaboration and how engaged Cornell fits into that in terms of bringing the resources of the university into the communities all around the state.
And then the last came from Christy, and she works for a home organization, and she felt it was really important that we concentrate on building opportunities for home ownership, whether that's and she felt it was important to connect all homeowners to abandoned, vacant properties. Oftentimes, these properties are available for the land bank, but they really aren't. New home buyers really can't take advantage of those. So she felt it was important to develop programs to enable them to take advantage of those types of properties. Okay, that's
Great,
it.
thank you. Is there anything that anybody else wants to add to that from your group at this point? Okay. Because we had an interest in the code enforcement piece over here, let's go back to your table next. Caroline?
Okay, I'm
And
going to
can
say
you-
I took probably more notes than I did actually pay attention to the conversation. So I'm going to summarize this. So if anyone in my group has something they want to add when I'm done, please, or clarify. We talked a lot about trying to make codes as effective as possible related to building safety, healthy housing, and public safety, particularly based on limited and restricted resources. So we talked a little bit about overall things, how to get things in a more cost-cutting and effective way on cost, having more teeth, getting more support for smaller municipalities, whether that's through the county or shared services, and then really talking about how to cross-train between departments, whether that's DPW, the police department, codes, all of those departments coming together to be able to do enforcement, particularly because some of those departments have lulls in their either seasonal work for DPW or for night shifts for certain departments, and how do you get them to use their time most effectively if they can. We talked a little bit about what types of incentives we need to have for our partners to want to participate, that a lot of times getting others to help us with things, that they need to know what's in it for them. And so we talked a little bit about that. We talked about codes enforcement being very emotional and kind of people are skeptical, and they have a lot of kind of personal relationships, particularly in small towns, of who you know depends on how the enforcement may happen to you or not happen to you. And then we talked a little bit about in that vein of things being positive and universal. So everyone does not necessarily have this negative feeling about codes, but they have also have a positive way of thinking about it, and that it's universally distributed. We talked a little bit about some very practical ways of doing things, different types of assessments, different ways of working together. We also had a conversation about training and education. So our codes enforcement officer, who happens to be sitting here, said, out of the 120 hours, they spend a very small portion on maintenance and upkeep for their training. They spend a lot of time on fire and new building codes. He's like, we don't do a lot of new building here. We have a lot of old housing stock that more time needs to be spent on that particular section of training. And then also discussed a little bit about half of the training that allows other departments to be able to cite for things related. So if your DPW goes through the half of that training, that they could cite on the codes department's behalf. So I think that is probably a pretty good overview. If anyone else has anything in my group that they want to add, please feel free. Yeah.
I would add again on the data points, if you can fit that in, that's huge. Facts, bring them to your council, to your leaders.
Yeah, can you move?
Oh, sorry.
There you go.
Getting data points, however that may be, if it's old-fashioned on the ground, or employing, technical service. The facts, obviously, you cannot argue those. So taking those to your leaders in your council, great way to push new initiatives and advocate for code enforcement.
I'm gonna, again, put you guys on the spot maybe in a way that I wouldn't necessarily with this group, but we may come back to it. Because you are all kind of focused around the same topic, were any of you willing to continue this conversation and help put some specific strategies together for how some of these things might happen? Did you get to that point to talk about it?
Sure, but don't tell my local code enforcement professional.
Okay. So people are interested. Could you be sure, David, to get the names of the people in the group that are willing to do that, please? Okay. Tolga, you're on. It's not on.
I turned it on. Okay, I got it. Okay, so we covered two issues. We had talked a little bit about both of them, and I'll give you a quick summary. But following the steps, the action step we're really looking at is initially looking at tax foreclosure properties and outcomes for those properties. And then through the course of our discussion, we added bank foreclosure because often those two will go together. So really looking at them and trying to figure out really this question of recidivism versus outcomes. So we have on one side your houses that successfully get a family or a rental or whatever, and on the other side that continue to come back into the cycle and probably eventually, I think somebody said it, end up a demo. So that was our action step. Clarifying the issue was really going through some of the challenges. One of the big ones, which somebody else mentioned, I think over there, was the data quality. So we have a lot of communities that use older systems. So that was one of the important pieces. Also, figuring out different issues in clarification, like bad actors. So if you determine one person that's had 3 or 4 foreclosures, you can start to scale that out and say, well, let's search for that bad actor as opposed to just looking, and that might unlock a whole host of other properties. We also talked about some different ways to improve the data set, one of which was document the different processes used for different FGUs, foreclosing governmental units, for their in-rem process. So some, let's say, might have just a straight-ahead auction. Some might have something where there's a clawback. So by understanding what the system is, so you can compare apples to oranges. Okay, this community had a lower rate of recidivism. Is there an inherent in their system? Is there a reason for that? We also talked about doing a survey at the outset to try and figure out the different systems being used, both technological, what their processes are, so we can have a starting point for all that data. We also discussed some key partners. One that was, I think, a very good suggestion, I think maybe by Joe, is working with the auction houses. Because across the state, there's maybe, a dozen auction houses that often do those tax foreclosure auctions. So rather than trying to chase down data from antiquated systems, we might be able to go to the auction houses with the permission of the counties and get their data. Because we gave the example, my county, Montgomery County, all the data, we have to retype it because it comes out of a mainframe. So it's like a data entry hurdle. Other partners were obviously the counties and the cities, with the key people being the clerks and the treasurers who really manage that data. And then the stakeholders in the communities, including your code staff. And another interesting suggestion was for maybe getting somebody like Ptolemy, where they might be able to work with us to get some of that data collected in one place. and about half the group volunteered to participate in an ongoing discussion. The second issue we touched upon was really looking at flood damage outcomes. And here, the two sides of the coin, versus occupancy or delinquency would be really, like a healthy used house, after or a buyout. I'm sorry. So the house has been removed, or somebody's still trying to live in a substandard house. But what we realized through the discussion, as we clarified, is that GOSER and others have a lot of that data, and they've been working with academic institutions. But we did identify some issues brought up earlier by, how do I pronounce your name? Youngavi. So identifying that a real, maybe a gap in this issue is with rental property residents, where often after a flood, due to the timing, they need to quickly relocate, and there aren't really the long-term programs for them to be able to get into another location, or there's not really there's different aspects, like we talked about the URA, which is money available through FEMA or HUD to relocate. But that it's often, being given out by different agencies, and maybe the responsiveness isn't there. So what we talked about is whereas the tax and bank foreclosure issue was a backwards-looking process, we're really seeing this as a forward-looking process, where maybe by putting together sort of a packet that we could share, so our constituency and our participants would include communities that were recently affected with floods. So if we could proactively put together this packet, and a key partner is the DSS in those communities, where we could go to them and say, okay, we've had a flood, you're probably dealing with a lot of families that are being displaced, so can you start to track that information? Because looking back, as they pointed out in the city of Binghamton, what happened is after the flood, everybody's just scrambling to find housing, and you're really not thinking of documenting. But if you're thinking, as you go into this, or even sharing that information with flood-prone communities, that they are thinking with their LWRPs and other planning resources, that this is an aspect to look at rentals that are in your floodplain and proactively develop a plan or a process where you can connect them with people for those URA resources. So it's not you're starting from zero at the start of the process. And about half of our group was interested in participating in that discussion, and also had some connections at some of the agencies that might be involved, like we discussed DISHES, the Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, FEMA, GOSER, and Jane had said that GOSER is very open to working to share data. So there was a lot of good discussion there as well.
Great, thank you, super. I want to give you all an opportunity to ask each other questions. Were there any questions related to any of what was reported back? Okay, Helene.
The one thing I want to say to the codes group is that this is going to be a big issue on the legislative agenda this year. The Attorney General's office is going to be working on these issues. I think HCR. There's a lot. It's a moment of opportunity because these legislators have made it a priority. So it's an opportunity to develop a wish list about what would you like to see happen. I mean, one of the big asks, of course, is more funding for code enforcement, but it isn't just about that. It's about modernizing code enforcement. It's about thinking of economies of scale rather than having a lot of part-time code enforcement officers in small villages, maybe doing some of it countywide, or so there's a whole bunch of, possibilities. This is an area where action might really get you results this year. So just wanted to flag that.
Can I put this back to you as a possibility? So you were talking about the network and the monthly meetings. If it hasn't been a topic in the monthly LISC network meetings, is it possible to put that on as a sleuthing process of what are your needs so that you develop that list that can be forwarded to legislators? You don't necessarily have to answer that now, but
Yeah, no, that would be good. That's a good idea. We should do a code enforcement webinar or a group call soon. We could do that.
And Helene, just so others who weren't in this group, do you want to just say more about that network and what we were talking about, the possibility of expanding it to include others?
Yeah, we, as part of the zombie program with the 76 municipalities, we set up a group monthly call for everyone to just jump on, share information. And because I was doing, and David and our colleagues were doing monthly calls with the municipalities, we really got to hear a lot of the different issues. And also who was doing interesting things to address them. So we have guest speakers, usually from the municipalities, and at some point some of the land banks got wind of it and said, well, could we be on these calls? We're like, yeah, the more the merrier. And we've got some nonprofits who jump on. It's a fairly informal thing. I mean, we'll send out an email, we'll say this is a topic this month, this is when we're having the call, here's the call-in number. You don't even really have to RSVP, you just get on. So it's a pretty easy way to continue the conversation. It doesn't take a lot of work.
And it
on our
sounds like
part.
you'd be open to others coming to you and saying, could we have a topic, could we discuss this topic or have a conversation about this if people want to kind of continue these types of things?
Sure, definitely.
Okay. Do you want to add anything more from a LISC perspective, David, just in terms of observations? Yes.
I was going to say not off the top of my head right now, so no, but I think it's been a very good discussion.
Deanna, I'm going to put you on the spot too. Anything that you want to just provide feedback on from an Engaged Cornell perspective about the conversations?
We actually had a really great conversation. We had a great conversation in which the Cornell Cooperative Extension people sort of expounded upon what that network is like. And so I hope that was helpful for others to realize how to access that network and bring those county offices into some of this housing work. And again, I'll offer myself up as a connector for that. It's often what I do is just make an introduction to some work that's going on in the county to the local extension office.
Thanks. I'd like to piggyback on some of the things that you just mentioned and Helene brought up originally in your group about the cooperative extension. We deal with this zombie property housing issue. It's a big thing for us. Blight's a big thing. But the biggest threat to our safety of and health of our citizens is harmful algal blooms. Harmful algal blooms in our drinking water. Yeah, it's a process that is happening more and more on the Finger Lakes. And I hate to say it, especially in this, wonderful room full of beautiful people, the cooperative extension is viewed as facilitating farmers in their expansion. Probably this particular floor of this building, which leads to runoff from large-scale agriculture, which leads to the potential threats to our drinking water. So what can the cooperative extension do, or what can we as the city of Auburn do to engage with the cooperative extension to change our minds? Because you're good people.
Yeah, I'm also just going to say, having worked for extension for years, I would agree that a lot of times they are very ag focused and sometimes forget that they actually also have a mission related to community vitality, not just agriculture, and to remind them that they also have an obligation to human ecology might be useful when approaching them. Maybe not.
So this is a great example of the diversity of the extension system, because you have the issue there with the extension being presumed to be promoting overuse of fertilizers, and that's leading to the algal blooms. In Delaware County, cooperative extension works extensively with farmers to control nutrient runoff, to ensure the quality of the City of New York's water supply. And sometimes that's seen as a negative by community members because they're controlling local outputs. But it's one of those things, it's the complexity of this system where it's different in every county.
David, did you want to?
I just wanted to add to that, this is a century-long conversation about the evolution of an organization, trying to sort of maintain its relevance in a society that's changing around it, while not at the same time saying sayonara to a lot of people that care about that it's been serving for many years. And just to build on what you just said, I mean, fundamentally, cooperative extension is a county-based agency in New York. And in some other states, it's more of a regional and statewide organization. But cooperative extension responds primarily to county legislators' interests.
So I'm hearing that as a takeaway, that there's an opportunity for folks working in housing, if they're not currently collaborating with Extension, which is maybe where you were going, Deanna, to help get that on the radar screen at the county level and take advantage of that opportunity. Is that okay? Tolga? Okay. Yeah, Deanna, or our cooperative extension rep? Yes, do you want to?
So my name is Suzanne Barclay, and I'm the executive director in Rockland, Cornell Cooperative Extension. First of all, we don't have agriculture. However, we do train our landscape contractors about the proper use of fertilizer, because it's a huge issue throughout the state. So we see our mission as being the link between the land-grant college, Cornell University, and our county residents. And we focus on 5 areas. We focus on nutrition, the environment, community and economic vitality, youth development, and horticulture, because as I said, farms are long gone from Rockland. So we provide short-term training, workshops on a whole variety of topics, and we get most of our resources from the university. So we, whenever we can, we join forces with campus and do grants or provide programs. But we see our role as being that link, that connection between the university and the residents of the county. So.
Could you clarify what you mean by resources?
Resources, so we get curriculum.
Not dollars.
And, oh, David, yes. So yes, we actually get, we get our base funding from our counties. So that's an appropriation. And because we get that basic funding, that allows us to leverage significant other funding from the Extension Administration system. So we get both state and federal dollars that allow us to exist. But we do have to supplement that with program fees, some fundraising, and also grants. And I think that's pretty typical of the extension system in the state.
So a question would be then, because even though I've been working with Extension as a partner for like 15 years, is that, as I think David mentioned or someone mentioned, that it's very county-based in New York State, which differs from other places. So one could imagine then that would be the case where county-based associations are more responsive to local needs. Although there's still the Extension Administration here on campus, but I believe that they're more interested in compliance rather than program provision, so that if there's opportunities for us to partner at the local level with CCE and LISC and other organizations for locally identified issues, such as the things that we've been talking about the last 2 days, then I don't know how many degrees of freedom each county has, in terms of resources and in-kind contributions, but there is a little bit more flexibility that way locally. Is that fair to say? Okay, so.
I think so. I did go over in my last session. I lost track of our stop time, so I don't want to do that to you now. I'm going to turn it over. Well, first, I want to thank you all for staying with us. If you don't have your names down on a sheet for something that you want to continue to follow up with, please get it there while Robin is wrapping up. And the facilitators, I'll take your notes before you leave. And with that, thank you all. A round of applause for sticking out and thinking it all through.